I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. St. Matthew 11:25. Do not trust winter until the very end of it. Do not trust yourself until your last breath. My son, I shall tell you what my father has told me, and what he had heard from his grandfather. Not one of the people you see around yourself will remain alive within 100 years. And of those you do not see, how many of them die each day in hospital wards and prison cells? Beside them, how many humans die on the way, or in back-breaking labors, or in quarrels and litigations against each other? Of a handful that we have in the remainder, how many are happy? And are they able to retain their happiness? And if not, is it happiness indeed? 2. A squirrel is running in a wheel. How great is its desire to reach a pine grove! A worm is gnawing upon an apple, and its only concern is whether its sweet world is endless. A mosquito is buzzing at your ear. How full of agitation and passion is that buzz! Would it that the squirrel run not as fast in its wheel! Would it that the worm hasten not with finishing its apple! Would it that the mosquito make somewhat less noise! Can this advice be helpful to them? And will they be able to grasp what they should do? And what about the human? Will he be able to find his true self in his earthly pursuits? 3. The truth is revealed to all, the honest and the dishonest, but it will never render herself to dishonest hands. The earthly sun shines upon the righteous and the unrighteous, but the spiritual sun will never be radiant in the unrighteous heart. 4. To build barricades against blizzards, to combat the frost with bonfires on the streets, to break ice cover on the rivers, will all that force the times of cold to depart? Only spring will bring them to an end, and those who fought winter in such a way keep saying, "We did a great job." 5. A villager looks grim for the whole day. The neighbors are in panic. They start guessing. Maybe their neighbor is planning mischief. Maybe he has it in his mind to lay hands on a disputed plot of land. Maybe he even decided to sue someone. So the concerned neighbors go and warn their relatives, their friends. One of them even runs to notify the mayor of the village. Everyone is worried and prepares himself for the worst. And in a few days they find out what was wrong with their neighbor. His wife had discovered a hiding place that he used to stash away some money. Had his neighbors not given way to their fantasy, they would not have become the laughing stock for the entire countryside. 6. Childhood desires to endlessly play. Youth desires to endlessly love. Maturity desires to endlessly work. Old age desires to endlessly start from the beginning. 7. The shadow of a tree becomes longer in the morning, becomes shorter at noon, again grows longer in the afternoon, and finally disappears at dusk. The shadow is in motion, while the tree is not. But in spite of that, it is the tree that is living, not the shadow. Conceptions come and go in turn. They are constantly in motion, while man's essence doesn't change. In spite of that, it is man who is living, not his conceptions. 8. Ground is being plowed, furrowed, seed is being sown into it, and ground does not resist. If it were to resist, where would the harvest come from? Wheat is being milled, flour is being kneaded into dough, and dough is being placed into a hot oven. If wheat were to grumble and refuse processing, where would bread come from? 9. In the summer, villagers place scarecrows in their fields and kitchen gardens. Every scarecrow looks different, since they all wear the clothes of their respective owners. And when it gets windy, the scarecrows start to flap their sleeves, to turn, to bow, and even to creak just like their masters. And for the birds, they are real human beings. 10. The town authorities set up a lamppost on the street, right by the sidewalk. Some people were happy that the street was now illuminated, and that pedestrians would no longer stumble in the darkness. Others were saying, upset, if the lantern goes out of service, one is sure to run into the lamppost and break one's head. Thus, an ordinary lamppost can bring joy to some and grief to others. Еще? Если хотите, можно будет еще писать. I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. St. Matthew 11:25. Do not trust winter until the very end of it. Do not trust yourself until your last breath. My son, I shall tell you what my father has told me, and what he had heard from his grandfather. Not one of the people you see around yourself will remain alive within 100 years. And of those you do not see, how many of them die each day in hospital wards and prison cells? Beside them, how many humans die on the way, or in back-breaking labors, or in quarrels and litigations against each other? Of a handful that we have in the remainder, how many are happy? And are they able to retain their happiness? And if not, is it happiness indeed? 2. A squirrel is running in a wheel. How great is its desire to reach a pine grove! A worm is gnawing upon an apple, and its only concern is whether its sweet world is endless. A mosquito is buzzing at your ear. How full of agitation and passion is that buzz! Would it that the squirrel run not as fast in its wheel? Would it that the worm hasten not with finishing its apple? Would it that the mosquito make somewhat less noise? Can this advice be helpful to them? And will they be able to grasp what they should do? And what about the human? Will he be able to find his true self in his earthly pursuits? 3. The truth is revealed to all, the honest and the dishonest, but it will never render herself to dishonest hands. The earthly sun shines upon the righteous and the unrighteous, but the spiritual sun will never be radiant in the unrighteous heart. 4. To build barricades against blizzards, to combat the frost with bonfires on the streets, to break ice cover on the rivers, will all that force the times of cold to depart? Only spring will bring them to an end, and those who fought winter in such a way keep saying, "We did a great job." 5. A villager looks grim for the whole day. The neighbors are in panic. They start guessing. Maybe their neighbor is planning mischief. Maybe he has it in his mind to lay hands on a disputed plot of land. Maybe he even decided to sue someone. So the concerned neighbors go and warn their relatives, their friends. One of them even runs to notify the mayor of the village. Everyone is worried and prepares himself for the worst. And in a few days they find out what was wrong with their neighbor. His wife had discovered a hiding place that he used to stash away some money. Had his neighbors not given way to their fantasy, they would not have become the laughing stock for the entire countryside. 6. Childhood desires to endlessly play. Youth desires to endlessly love. Maturity desires to endlessly work. Old age desires to endlessly start from the beginning. 7. The shadow of a tree becomes longer in the morning, becomes shorter at noon, again grows longer in the afternoon, and finally disappears at dusk. The shadow is in motion, while the tree is not. But in spite of that, it is the tree that is living, not the shadow. Conceptions come and go in turn. They are constantly in motion, while man's essence doesn't change. In spite of that, it is man who is living, not his conceptions. 8. Ground is being plowed, furrowed, seed is being sown into it, and ground does not resist. If it were to resist, where would the harvest come from? Wheat is being milled, flour is being kneaded into dough, and dough is being placed into a hot oven. If wheat were to grumble and refuse processing, where would bread come from? 9. In the summer, villagers place scarecrows in their fields and kitchen gardens. Every scarecrow looks different, since they all wear the clothes of their respective owners. And when it gets windy, the scarecrows start to flap their sleeves, to turn, to bow, and even to creak just like their masters. And for the birds, they are real human beings. 10. The town authorities set up a lamppost on the street, right by the sidewalk. Some people were happy that the street was now illuminated, and that pedestrians would no longer stumble in the darkness. Others were saying, upset, if the lantern goes out of service, one is sure to run into the lamppost and break one's head. Thus, an ordinary lamppost can bring joy to some and grief to others. Еще? Ну, если хотите, можно будет еще писать. A man ardently dreamed of finding a treasure and getting rich. As the time went by, he began to think that the treasure could lie in his own basement. Why not? The man grew so sure of it that he began earnestly searching for the treasure, and kept doing it until the basement was dug through and through. After that, the man started grieving. When others advised him to forget about the non-existent treasure, he would reply, "But where did I get the idea that the treasure was here? If it were not here, I would have never started searching. I still feel that it is somewhere near." No one was able to dissuade the man until the end of his life. 12. Children draw outlines of different animals on the sand by the sea. They name them cat, dog, horse, tiger, and happily play with them. And when someone is clumsy enough to step on their drawings, the children break into tears. They are sorry for the animals drawn on the sand. But then, when the children are tired of the game, they just leave everything and run home. And their creatures, cats, dogs, horses, and tigers, are washed away by the waves. 13. Once upon a time, a mighty king ordered that his courtiers compete in lying. The one who manages to produce the greatest lie would be lavishly rewarded. The courtiers strained themselves to invent various stories, but not one of their lies impressed the king. Every time he would say, "No, this does not sound like a lie. Something like this can easily happen in reality." Unexpectedly, there appeared a soldier who stated that he knew the greatest lie. The soldier was brought before the king. He was told that for his insolence he would be punished by beheading if he is not able to please the king. "Very well," the soldier responded firmly. "I am ready." "Then begin," ordered the king. "The king has died," the soldier exclaimed loudly. "The king is dead." "Stop, stop, this is impossible," the king shouted, confused. "Fine, I agree, this is the greatest lie in the world. 14. A recently born foal was afraid of everything. He was trembling. He was so weak that he would constantly fall on his knees. When the foal saw big horses that were running swift and free across a green meadow, he was so scared that he hid under his mother's belly, and from there his thin voice sounded. Would I really ever become like them? Don't be afraid, my child, the mare replied. You are born to run. There is time for everything. A day will come, and you will see how you can dash across the meadow, swift and free. 15. In a kingdom there was a town where all residents were obliged to wear masks. 15. In a kingdom there was a town where all residents were obliged to wear masks. They became so accustomed to it that they would not recognize each other with their masks off. But there came a time when the old king died, and the new king annulled the decrees of the previous reign. So the townsmen had to make acquaintance with one another all over again. And if they were unable to recognize a friend or a relative without a mask, they would try to recall what mask he had been wearing in the past. And they would get amazed at seeing how great the difference was between the mask and the real face. 16. A village joker came to the river bank and hung a pitcher on a branch of a tall alder. His fellow villagers, who used to go there to fish, soon noticed the reflection of the pitcher in the water. A rumor began to spread that there was a pitcher filled with gold on the bottom of the river. Many people dived into the river and tried to grasp the pitcher, but alas, they could not find it under water, although they were able to see it clearly from the bank. Once a passerby observed their vain efforts and asked, "What are you looking for?" The villagers explained that they were trying to find a pitcher filled with gold. The passerby smiled and said, "The pitcher is hanging above your heads, and you are looking for it under water." 17. Once a hunter got lost in the mountains. Trying to make his way out of a deep gorge, he stumbled and flew down headlong, but he didn't get smashed because he fell into a lake. The water of the lake was live water, but the hunter was not aware of that, and he did not know how to swim. Having gulped a good amount of water, he managed to come up to the surface and started screaming, "Help! I am dying! I shall drown!" But the hunter did not drown because the water supported him, and did not die because it was live water. With great pains he reached the shore and saw the inscription on a cliff. "The water of this lake is live water. He who tastes the water will live long, but he will never find the road to this place again." The hunter made his way out of the gorge and finally reached his home. Indeed, he lived long, but he was never able to tell anyone the location of the lake with live water. 18. A family living on a distant farm on the edge of the forest received guests. The visitors spent the day with their hosts, admiring the picturesque surroundings and the beautiful pond near the farm. Towards the evening, the guests decided to walk to the neighboring village, and promised to come back before darkness falls. The hosts advised their guests, "When you walk back, follow the direction of the pond. When you see the pond, you are home." However, the guests met some old acquaintances in the village, and talked with them for quite a while. They decided to go back to the farm only when it was completely dark, and rain started to fall. The villagers offered to accompany them, but the guests refused, saying that they remembered the road well and would return safely on their own. Unfortunately, they took a wrong turn and started to follow the road leading directly to the pond. It was pitch dark, so they ended up falling into the water. "Wonderful," said one of the guests as they were climbing out. "It is exactly the pond that they have advised us to look for. Now we know precisely where we are." And indeed they discerned a light nearby. That was the window of the farmhouse, where the hosts met them, relieved and happy. 19. Shepherd dogs that guard sheep in the mountains are very ferocious and have a terrifying appearance. So the passers-by prefer to stay away from them. Once it happened that a man did not notice the flock in the dell, and when he saw the sheep it was too late. A pack of angry dogs, scattering on the run to form a semicircle, was approaching him. It was already impossible to escape, and the wayfarer, not knowing what to do, just sat down on the ground, come what may. But to the man's great surprise, the dogs, having reached their prey, did not attack. Instead, they sat at a small distance from him and remained there, furious as they were. As soon as the wayfarer would move, the dogs were ready to jump on him, so he preferred to stay motionless. In a short while, the shepherds ran up to the spot and drove the dogs away. They were quite surprised to see the man safe and sound. It was smart of you to sit down and not move. Only because of that they did not hurt you, the shepherds told the man. 20. When a candle is reflected in a multitude of mirrors that surround it, it is difficult to find the real candle. When a goldfish is swimming in an aquarium made of mirrored glass, it is impossible to distinguish the live fish from its reflections. 21. A group of devoted scientists was very eager to find some previously unknown species. The scientists would roam the mountains looking for unusual footprints, and thoroughly questioned the locals. And one day, the inhabitants of a small village deep in the wilderness told the researchers that a strange animal had been noticed in the surroundings. The scientists examined the nearby paths and indeed discovered some bizarre footprints. At night, sounds would reach them from the mountain slopes, and it appeared that some creature was wandering there. The rumors about these phenomena soon reached the city. Curious people started to go to the mountains for their summer vacations. To accommodate them, the locals built several inns and hotels, and a road was built to the village that was in the center of interest. Articles about the search for the unknown animal were regularly published in popular science magazines, in spite of the fact that no one had succeeded in actually finding it. Gradually, the small village in the wilderness turned into a resort town, and old men would laugh among themselves. Of course, no one has ever seen such an animal around here, but we were so good in forging its footprints and spreading rumors about it that our village became a prosperous resort. 22. A boy and his father liked to launch a kite together. The boy wrote his name on it and would imagine that it was he himself soaring in the sky. As time went by, that idea became embedded in his heart. But once a strong gust of wind broke the cord the kite was bound to. So the kite fell on the ground and was broken. The boy was crying and could not be consoled. He kept telling everyone that it was he himself who crashed to death together with the kite. But the boy's father managed to calm him down. "My son, you were always here by my side," he said. "It was the kite that crashed, while you are alive, and you can make another kite if you wish. Remember, you are just guiding the kite, you are not flying, so you cannot crash together with it." 23. Two men were traveling in the mountains. They came to an area where unusual rock formations resembled figures of human beings, beasts, and some fantastic creatures. "Look," exclaimed one of the travelers, "here is a woman's head." The other one looked and said, "No, this is an old man's head." They started to argue, and each was trying to prove that he was right. Then it occurred to them that they could switch places. "Now it's clear," both men exclaimed. "From one place you see a woman's head, and from the other place an old man's head," although in both instances those images were just weathered rocks. 24. A woodcutter knew that wild beasts were dangerous for man. The beasts can instantly become infuriated and attack anything that moves. "If you see a bear, do not run, stay still," experienced people advised him. Those words remained in his memory. Once in the spring, the woodcutter was walking through the forest. All of a sudden, a she-bear with 2 cubs appeared on the path just a few meters in front of him. The she-bear turned her huge head in the man's direction and gazed attentively. The woodcutter stopped, stiff with fear. The she-bear sniffed the scent of the man, standing still, and studied him with suspicion. The cubs ran off to the thicket, and the she-bear, not having discovered anything threatening, crossed the path without haste and followed her cubs. "Oh yes, those people were right," the woodcutter said to himself, recovering from his fright. Now their advice came in handy. 25. A man had a good friend in the times of his youth. Whenever he remembered about his friend, he always turned up near. At times the man tended to forget about his friend and would not see him for a long time, but would still constantly feel his friend's care and help. After a while, the man got married and became father of children. More and more rarely he would recall his friend. Soon, the concerns about the family's well-being began to drain all of his energy. He frequently got sick and ended up in a hospital. Neither his wife nor his children were able to help him in any way, and his other relatives were preoccupied by their own troubles. When the man felt that he was getting worse and worse, he remembered about his long-forgotten friend, and the friend came to the hospital right away. He paid all the bills and made sure the man was well taken care of. The patient's state started to improve, and only then the man started to seriously think about his life. No one was able to do as much for him. And only then the man started to seriously think about his life. No one was able to do as much for him in the time of his misfortune as his friend did. How could he show the appreciation for his friend's kindness and concern? The man decided, from that time on, he would always treat his friend with warmth and love, and would never forget about him. In a short while, his friend came once more to visit him and said, "My dear, only the illness changed your attitude towards me. Had you been holding by me and following my advice all those years, you would have seen an even greater love towards you, and your life would have taken quite a different course." 26. A big plate tree was growing on the street in front of the house, spreading its branches wide. The passers-by would often praise it. "What a great and beautiful tree! How shady it is! How pleasant it is to rest under it when it gets hot!" At times, other voices would sound. "You know how many leaves this tree sheds in the autumn? Besides, in the winter entire branches fall down, and one has to toil taking all of that off the street." And all those words did not make the plate tree bigger or smaller. It always remained the same. 27. In the depth of the garden there stood a big old stump of a chestnut tree, gnarly and overgrown with moss. A boy liked to play in that garden. More than of anything in the world, he was afraid of the terrible tree stump, because the boy was taking it for a wicked robber from a fairy tale. "Robber, robber," the boy would scream, running back to his parents in the house. One evening, the boy's father took him by the hand and walked him right to the horrible tree stump. "Look carefully and do not fear. You don't see any robber, do you?" "Now I don't," the boy responded. "But when I am afraid of him, the robber appears, and when I am not afraid, he disappears." 28. Once in the summer a young man was walking through the woods. He was not able to reach home before darkness, and had to spend the night in the forest. It started to drizzle. The young man settled under a pine tree and made a bonfire. At first, while the fire was burning, the young man felt confident. But when he prepared to go to sleep, the fire had already died out, and the youth started feeling uneasy. Now he would hear a branch crackling somewhere, now the wind would swing the tops of the pine trees, now some unknown sounds would emerge from the very depth of the thicket. It appeared to the young man that the forest was full of various beasts and terrible monsters. He started to recall different horror stories about forest encounters, and it gave him the shivers. But then the young man thought, "I am completely alone in this forest, and there is no one around me." His fear disappeared at once, and he continued to think, "All of these forest sounds are quite natural. Had there been beasts nearby, the smoke from the bonfire would have scared them away. Therefore, those were just my own fears, and if some problems do occur, I shall think how to solve them then, not now." In this way, the young man calmed down completely and fell asleep. Whenever he woke up in the darkness, he would recall that he had no one and nothing to be afraid of, because all fears existed only in him, and would fall asleep again. From that time on, the young man was never afraid to spend the night in the woods alone. 29. To aim to climb the summit and to reach only the mountain pass is better than not to start at all. To desire to move to the capital city and to settle in its suburb is better than to stay home in the village. To visit an interesting country even in transit is better than just to hear stories about it. To comprehend even part of the truth is better than not to know it at all. 30. The forester sees forest, while the woodcutter sees trees. The captain sees ocean, while the fisherman sees fish. The passerby sees field, while the peasant sees land. The pilgrim sees sky, while the seaman sees clouds. 31. As long as the house is vacant, there are no concerns about repairs. As long as the field is not sown, there are no concerns about the harvest. As long as there is no fish in the pond, there are no fishermen in sight. As long as there are no evil thoughts in the heart, there is no trouble. 32. When a man is just learning to swim, it is completely incomprehensible to him how it is done. But as soon as he starts to swim, everything gets clear. When a man just hears about the truth, it is completely incomprehensible to him what it is all about. But as soon as he learns the truth, everything gets clear. 33. A city dweller came to the countryside and went to the forest to pick berries together with a villager. They got somewhat carried away by the picking, and after a while found themselves in a marshy area. The villager noticed danger and warned the city dweller. "Now we must be cautious. We must stick to the path by which we came here, because towards the right there is a swamp, and towards the left a quagmire." "And what is the difference between them?" the city man asked. "Really not much, only in the quagmire you go down faster." 34. Once there was a prince who heard about a young beautiful princess living in a faraway land. He decided to win her heart and departed with a small suite. After some days of travel, he and his companions were met by a great army of the princes. The commanding general told the prince that in order to see the princess, he would first have to cross swords with him. In the course of the fierce fight, the prince cast his adversary on the ground, and the general begged for mercy. He said that he was ready to surrender with his entire army, if only the prince goes back to his native land. But the prince refused the offer, saying that he desired to see the princess. He released the general, and his troops allowed the prince and his suite to pass. Soon the castle of the princess appeared in sight. Ministers and servants came out to meet the prince with opulent gifts. They offered him various treasures, should he agree to turn back. But the prince insisted that they let him see the princess. When the prince and the princess finally met, they fell in love with each other. The princess consented to go with the prince to his country. When they departed, they were followed by the entire army headed by the general, all ministers and servants, with the treasures of the princess. 35. A young man learned that somewhere in the world there was a stone that could fulfill wishes. He desired to find that stone and started to ask various people, trying to encounter someone who could help him. But in his land, no one knew anything about the stone. So the young man set forth as a wanderer. He was going from one country to another until he was told that in one distant land there lived a wise man who knew where the stone could be found. After a long and difficult journey, the tired youth finally faced the wise man. "Are not you a native of such and such country?" the wise man asked. "Yes," replied the youth, "I came to you from that country." "And are not you a resident of such and such city, living in a house by the lake?" "Yes, I truly live there," replied the youth, perplexed. "Well," the wise man declared, "it is known to me that the miraculous stone is set in the wall of your room, in that very house where you live. So I must return home after such an exhausting journey?" "If you had not reached me, overcoming so many obstacles," replied the wise man, "how would you have learned where you could find the miraculous stone?" 36. Only he who sees nothing will be able to find the secret chamber with no walls, no ceiling, and no floor. Only he who knows nothing will be able to settle there. Only he who does not know how to talk will be able to tell about it. Only he who is completely deaf will be able to hear what they tell him. And only he who has nothing will be able to possess what is located in the chamber. 37. In the land of the blind, a one-eyed man is king. In the land of the kings, an ordinary man is a rarity. In the land of the fools, a reasonable man is a great scholar. In the land of great scholars, a simple-hearted man is a rare treasure. 38. For whales, the ocean is a cradle. For an ant, a puddle is stormy sea. For swallows, the sky is native home. For mosquitoes, slight breeze is a source of worry. 39. The eagle does not get tired of flying. The cow does not get bored of chewing its cud. The dog does not break its teeth gnawing on bones. Man's heart cannot be saturated with God. 40. To end in a pot, it is enough for a fish to swallow the bait but once. To become a thief, it is enough to steal but once. To fall into an abyss, it is enough to step but once. To experience innumerable woes, one evil thought is enough. 41. One can recognize his father and his mother in any crowd. If food is tasty, there is no doubt about it. One can discern the aroma of a fragrant rose from all other scents. The song of the nightingale in the forest cannot be confused with other birds' voices. 42. Wherever the fox runs, it always returns to its hole. Swifts in the spring return to their old nests. Every bee knows its hive. Wherever man's desires roam, they always return to the heart. 43. A thief in an unknown house is frightened by his own shadow. A hare in the woods is scared even by a falling leaf. A wild beast is afraid of daylight. A lonely man is afraid of himself. 44. Look for the lost spectacles on your own forehead. The lost bucket will be found in the well. The fish that disappeared from the table will be seen in the cat's claws. If you are looking for the truth, look for it in your heart. 45. When a mother takes the crying baby in her arms, he calms down right away. When the fragrance of a rose reaches one's nostrils, there is no need to say that it has bloomed. When a child has fallen asleep, there is no need to explain to him that he sleeps. When man finds God, he understands it himself. 46. If you keep pushing the carpenter's arm, the job will be ruined. If you keep lecturing the driver while he is at the wheel, an accident is imminent. If you keep showing the smith where he must strike, you can lose your finger. If you keep talking and never listen, you will find no one to converse with. 47. When a dog is chasing a hare, it will not be led astray. When a cat is playing with a captive mouse, you cannot lure it with a fish. When a bear reaches honey, it loses all fear. When a rich man sees money, he forgets about everything in the world. 48. If you do not want to lose anything, own nothing. If you do not want to roam, do not leave your house. If you dislike noise, do not attend marketplaces. If you are looking for peace, do not have any cares. 49. A man's wife died. Struck by grief, he neglected all his affairs and fell into deep melancholy. The rooms of his house became full of litter and dust, and the man himself appeared completely wasted. His neighbor felt pity for the poor widower, and advised him to at least go and wash his face. "What for?" the widower replied. "One of my rooms is all litter, the other one is all dust. I shall never be able to wash myself clean. If you in your house have litter in one room and dust in the other," the neighbor exclaimed, "then either clean them up or don't enter there at all. Just rub your eyes clean and you will see at once what to do." 50. A man was very fond of fowl. In his house he had numerous cages where he held his birds, to which he was much attached. He fed them, gave them water, cleaned the cages, and admired the birds singing. But as time went by, the man started to feel overburdened by all the tasks he had to fulfill to take care of his birds. He told a friend about his anguish. "Let them go," the friend advised, "and you will be free of all the cares." "I could let them go," the bird fancier said. "The problem is that they are not letting me go." 51. So many birds chirp joyfully in the forest, and there are hardly any hungry ones among them. Many beasts are roaming in the woods, and you never see any that would be just skin and bones. An infant is feeding only on maternal milk, and is not preoccupied with what he is going to eat in the evening. The world follows the one who follows the truth. 52. Once a geologist was walking across the desert back to his camp. He was trapped by a sandstorm, lost his way, and started to roam the desert. He took care to save his stock of water, but after a while the last drop was drunk, and the geologist felt he was weakening. He climbed a barhan and saw a tiny oasis, a small water source, some grass, and a few bushes. The geologist spent several days there, feeding on the last loaf of bread that he had left. He was already afraid to go away from the water, because he was not sure that he had sufficient strength to reach the camp, or, should he fail, to return to the spring. The geologist reflected and made the final decision. It is better to die near a spring than to roam the sands. He was ready to abide by this decision to the end. And when the man was already starting to lose hope, the drovers of a caravan that was passing by noticed him, and he was saved. 53. Solitude in a city is harder than in a desert. Estrangement of a loved one is more painful than life among unfamiliar people. A silent reproach of your kin is bitterer than open reprimands. Friendly support is better than solemn vows and promises. 54. Look for the exit where you have entered. Descend where you have ascended. Finish where you have started. Continue where you have stopped. 55. What you are striving for is in constant retreat. What you are trying to go away from is in constant pursuit. Leave everything to the people, and they will leave you. Let everything be what it is. 55. A long time ago, a villager noticed a cave high up in the mountains, upon an almost inaccessible cliff. He recalled a legend that somewhere in this area the treasures of the ancient kings were hidden. With extreme difficulty he reached the cave. The man entered it and saw a copper door near the cave's mouth. He opened the door and came into a chamber with heaps of copper coins lying on the floor. Without delay, the mountaineer filled all his pockets with coins, stuffed as many as he could under his shirt, and prepared to return home. Having closed the copper door behind him, he noticed another one, somewhat deeper inside the cave. That door was made of silver. The man opened it and saw a chamber full of silver coins. He quickly threw out the copper money and stuffed silver wherever he could. He was again ready to leave, but at that moment he discerned in the darkness yet another door, this time made of gold. The mountaineer threw the door open. The chamber behind it was full of gold coins. Hastily he threw out the silver and loaded himself up with gold, so that he was hardly able to move. Finally he could leave for sure. But right by the cave's opening, the mountaineer saw a wooden door, moldy and obviously very old. Hesitatingly he opened it. There was nothing inside the chamber except for a simple wooden staff placed on a stone. The mountaineer took the staff, bewildered. Not knowing what to do with it, he struck the staff against the floor. At once, extraordinary precious ornaments and gems started to pour from somewhere. The man was numb with fascination. The staff slipped away from his hands, and the flow of jewels stopped. The man realized that with the staff in his possession, he will need no treasures of the cave. He threw away all the gold, took only the staff, and left the cave forever. 57. A resident of a distant province was very interested in the capital of his country. He yearned to know what it looks like, what landmarks, monuments, squares, parks the city has. But there was no one he could ask. Living far away from the center of the country, he was not familiar with anyone who had visited the capital. So he had to content himself with collecting photographs, postcards, and newspaper articles about the city he loved. Once, due to a lucky chance, he finally had an opportunity to go to the capital himself. When he had already walked the city through and through and felt more confident in it, he was handed a letter from his fellow townsmen. They were informing him that they had found an old man who, in the times of his youth, had briefly seen the capital and still remembered a few things about the city. Friends, but what need do Это я пропущу, потому что здесь ошибка. The man wrote back, I'm already here myself.
Еще 10.
58. A man's wife left him, and he was terribly upset, to the extent that he fell into despair, became ill, and was taken to a psychiatric hospital. Having regained his senses, he asked the doctors to let him return home, but was told that the course of treatment was not over yet. The man was indignant and started to argue. They gave him an injection by force, so the patient fell asleep. After he woke up, the man felt terrible headache and cramps in his entire body. He was afraid for his life, so he decided not to allow the personnel to give him any more injections. The man informed the doctors about it, after which he was again forcefully injected with an even more powerful dose. Having regained consciousness, the man realized that resistance was fruitless. He decided to stop arguing with the doctors, to be calm and patient, and not to complain. Very soon he noticed that the personnel started to treat him differently. There were no more injections, and after a while he was no longer given pills as well. Finally, there came a day when he was discharged from the hospital. 59. The great ocean does not make any efforts to be great. Big rivers are the quietest ones, but they flow far. High mountains do not grow high at someone else's expense. Humble people are not in the spotlight, but they are more reliable than many others. 60. Once a merchant came to a faraway country and entered a strange city where all residents wore shackles. The merchant thought, and if they shackle me as well, what should I do then? That very moment the guards approached, and having noticed a new free man, immediately put him in irons. The merchant realized he could no longer return home, and started losing heart. He tried to question the unfortunate residents of the city, why all of them were shackled. They replied that such was an age-old custom of the city. So all people of this city are doomed to wear shackles until they die? The merchant asked. The people responded, It is rumored that sometimes there comes to the city an old man who is free and does not wear shackles. Only that man knows how one can become free. But he appears so rarely that many of us are in doubt whether it is true. There is nothing I can do but wait, the merchant thought. Perhaps I shall be able to meet that old man and learn how to free myself. Many years passed, the merchant grew older, and his hair started to turn gray. But one day he suddenly saw an old man walking freely by the street, unshackled. "Old sir," the captive exclaimed, "help me to get rid of my irons." "My son," replied the old man, "all you have to do is to say inwardly, 'Let the guards unshackle me at once.' Then you will be free." The captive thought that it was just a harsh joke, but he still decided to try and pronounced inwardly the magic phrase. Momentarily the guards appeared and unshackled him. The astonished merchant hurried to leave the strange city. Outside the city gates he saw the old man again. "Old sir, please tell me, what is the secret of this city?" he begged him. "This city is not easy to understand," replied the old man. "Here one becomes a captive and goes free by the medium of his thoughts. You were saved only because you believed my words, and those who do not believe me remain captives of the city, and there is nothing else I can do for them." Пока хватит. 61. Friendship with a lion can end badly. Where wolves abound, it is better not to pasture sheep. You cannot chase dogs away with a bone. You will not get rid of evil thoughts if you obey them. 62. Due to the slander of some malevolent people, a man ended up in a horrible prison from which no one emerged alive. The prison had been built by a sorcerer, and his servants were guarding the unfortunate prisoners. The new inmate tried to escape through various means, but every time he failed. The infuriated guards beat him heavily, and finally transferred him to a solitary cell on death row. Here the prisoner discovered a tiny crack in the wall, in which there was a yellowed piece of paper with the following words: "There is only one way to escape from this prison. All other methods are fruitless. Once every 10 years, at night, the sorcerer's forces weaken, and the cell door remains unlocked. That night you may be able to escape. Remember, as you go, you must keep silence, whatever you see. The corridor makes 3 turns, and each turn is manned by a guard who possesses magic powers. The guards will create terrible images in order to stop you. If you say a single word, you are lost." When the long-awaited night finally came, the prisoner discovered that the door of his cell was really unlocked. He came out and started walking slowly. At the first turn, before he even reached the guard box, he suddenly saw his old mother, moribund and asking to stop and bid her farewell. The poor inmate, recalling what the note said, with a tremendous effort forced himself to keep on going. At the next turn, right by the guard box, the man saw his father, who was agonizing and begging him to approach and say but a few words. The prisoner, torn by pity, still kept silence and walked on faster. Behind the third guard box there was an exit from the terrible prison. Right outside, the inmate saw his wife and son, who were running towards him overjoyed. And at that very moment, a huge torrent of water roared, inundating the street. People were screaming that the dam had collapsed and the city was being flooded. The prisoner rushed to save his wife and son, but they were caught in a whirlwind and went under. "My wife, my son," the poor man screamed in horror, unable to withstand the sight. At that very moment he found himself back in his cell. 63. It is easy to understand lie, but it is difficult to understand truth. That is why there is a lot of lie in the world and truth is rare. People are quick to believe in lie and cannot accept truth, because lie is comfortable and truth is not. 64. A thief appears and your pocket is empty. A tiny hole in a barrel and the wine is gone. A small mouse in a jar and the oil is spoiled. A little evil thought and all joy leaves the heart. 65. A flock of birds was flying to Africa for the winter. Young birds that were going to see Africa for the first time were agitated, uneasy, made noise, and asked numerous questions. Is it really hot in Africa? Are there rivers in Africa? Are there forests? Does it rain in Africa? The leader of the flock at first answered all the questions, but grew tired and said, "You know what, children? The main thing is to reach Africa, and there you will have nothing to worry about." 66. A man went fishing with some old friends, and took his teenage son. 66. A man went fishing with some old friends, and took his teenage son with him. The adults, seeing that the boy does not know how to do anything, began to teach him how to make a bonfire, how to secure a pot over it, how to clean fish, how to wash dishes. The boy would often argue and get upset, feeling that he is clumsy. He approached his father and said, "Dad, I learned many new things, but I can't do them all well. That hurts me, and I get tired because of it." "Son," the father replied, "just be humble all the time, and you will feel better." A few days passed, and the boy came up to his father again. "Dad, I keep being humble, and I get tired of it even more. Is it okay if I take a rest from humility for a day?" 67. Young soldiers were in combat for the first time. They were very afraid to die, so they were constantly ducking, taking shelter from bullets and shells, and almost panicked. There were many wounded among them. When the battle was over, The young soldiers asked a weathered veteran to teach them how to survive. Is the key to dig trenches deeper, to always hug the ground and go on all fours? All of that is good, the veteran soldier said, but the best is to learn to sacrifice yourself for the sake of others. Only in this way you can survive. Death is afraid of good people. '68. On weekends, when the husband and the wife stayed home together, they would frequently argue, get annoyed, and tell each other many offensive things. Steaming with anger, the husband would go outside in order to regain himself. By the entrance there was a bench, and an old woman used to rest there, while her tiny dog would run nearby. Once the man noticed that sometimes the dog barks at him angrily, while at other times, when he returns home from work, it does not pay any attention to him. He decided to ask the old woman why her dog was acting in such a way. "Oh dear," she replied, "my little one always senses whenever people are angry or irritated and barks at them, and when people are calm, the doggy does not even notice them." 69. A sick man's thoughts are about his illness, a healthy man's about his marriage. Thoughts about sensual delights come to the Epicurean. Thoughts about salvation come to the man who is seeking God. 70. Because the wind blows, flour is ground at the mill. Because the bowl is round, everyone likes it. Because the man is soft, he can be a good friend. Because the man is faithful, he can be trusted. 71. A decrepit wall one day will collapse. A tall pine one day will fall. A snake that entered the house one day will bite. An evil thought, if you are not careful, will surely lead to death. 72. The streams of the waterfall incessantly fall down, but the waterfall itself does not fall. The sea waves constantly run ashore, but the sea itself does not move anywhere. Know the depth of the heart, and you will be steadfast. 73. A cuckoo in the woods hears only the echo of its own voice. Winter frost creates a different pattern on every window pane. In every drop of dew there is a sun. In every human heart there is a universe. 74. Where forest paths diverge, it is not easy to understand where to go. If there is fog over the sea, it is hard to determine where the coast is. Blue sky is always high. In the middle of the ocean, all shores are distant. 75. The one who vacillates knows nothing yet. The one who knows does not vacillate. He who doubts will find himself back where he started. He who is firm in his faith will emerge from all troubles unhurt. 76. There are many seeds in the sunflower, and the stalk is one. A flock of birds spends the night on a single tree. Seagulls of the entire coast nest on a single island. Evil thoughts come to the one who consents to them. 77. A peasant living on a distant farm sheltered a bandit out of pity. After some time, the bandit left and returned with his companions in crime. The peasant was weak-willed, so he allowed them to stay, and soon his house turned into a den. The bandits were bringing there all their booty. When the gang was caught, the peasant went to trial along with the bandits as their accomplice. "So how did you become a bandit?" the judge asked him severely. The peasant sighed heavily. "Due to a lack of character, Your Honor." 78. A 5-year-old boy was afraid to stay home alone when his parents left to attend to their business. As soon as they stepped outside, everything in the house seemed to come to life. The boy was frightened by the howling of the wind in the attic, by the rustle of the branches against the window pane. It always seemed to him that someone was walking in the house, while it was only the quiet ticking of the table clock. When his parents returned home, the boy would always tell them how scared he had been without them. "Don't be afraid, sonny," his father used to tell him. "In the house there is nothing at all to be afraid of." "I know, Daddy," the boy would reply, "and still it is scary." 79. Rare animals hide in the most impenetrable thickets. Rare metals lie deep in the earth. Modesty is far from high ranks and fame. The most unremarkable man is the support for all. 80. The nearer rain is, the lower swallows fly. The less a patient is capricious, the better he is looked after. The lower a lake is, the more rivers fall into it. The lower the head is, the closer the heart is to God. 71. A decrepit wall one day will collapse. A tall pine one day will fall. A snake that entered the house one day will bite. An evil thought, if you are not careful, will surely lead to death. 72. The streams of the waterfall incessantly fall down, but the waterfall itself doesn't fall. The sea waves constantly run ashore, but the sea itself does not move anywhere. Know the depth of the heart, and you will be steadfast. 73. A cuckoo in the woods hears only the echo of its own voice. Winter frost creates a different pattern on every window pane. In every drop of dew there is a sun. In every human heart there is a universe. 74. Where forest paths diverge, it is not easy to understand where to go. If there is fog over the sea, it is hard to determine where the coast is. Blue sky is always high. In the middle of the ocean, all shores are distant. 75. The one who vacillates knows nothing yet. The one who knows does not vacillate. He who doubts will find himself back where he started. He who is firm in his faith will emerge from all troubles unhurt. 76. There are many seeds in the sunflower, and the stalk is one. A flock of birds spends the night on a single tree. Seagulls of the entire coast nest on a single island. Evil thoughts come to the one who consents to them. 77. A peasant living on a distant farm sheltered a bandit out of pity. After some time, the bandit left and returned with his companions in crime. The peasant was weak-willed, so he allowed them to stay, and soon his house turned into a den. The bandits were bringing there all their booty. When the gang was caught, the peasant went to trial along with the bandits as their accomplice. "So how did you become a bandit?" the judge asked him severely. The peasant sighed heavily. "Due to a lack of character, Your Honor." 78. A 5-year-old boy was afraid to stay home alone when his parents left to attend to their business. As soon as they stepped outside, everything in the house seemed to come to life. The boy was frightened by the howling of the wind in the attic, by the rustle of the branches against the window pane. It always seemed to him that someone was walking in the house, while it was only the quiet ticking of the table clock. When his parents returned home, the boy would always tell them how scared he had been without them. "Don't be afraid, sonny," his father used to tell him. "In the house there is nothing at all to be afraid of." "I know, Daddy," the boy would reply, "and still it is scary." 79. Rare animals hide in the most impenetrable thickets. Rare metals lie deep in the earth. Modesty is far from high ranks and fame. The most unremarkable man is the support for all. 80. The nearer rain is, the lower swallows fly. The less a patient is capricious, the better he is looked after. The lower a lake is, the more rivers fall into it. The lower the head is, the closer the heart is to God. 81. When you are carrying medicine to a gravely ill man, don't be delayed anywhere. When you are trying to catch up with someone, better mind your feet. When you are treating someone to a meal, don't count your expenses. When you are lending money, don't expect it to be returned. 82. A fox prefers to gnaw off its own paw, but to escape from the trap. A fish jumps out of water when being pursued. A drowning man is not worried that his hat has sunk. To guard the heart against an evil thought is more important than to save yourself from death. 83. Regardless of how big a wheel is, it is always propped up by the earth in its lowest part. A stone falls lower whenever possible. The most necessary part of a shoe is the sole. The best man is the humble one. 84. The rainbow is beautiful because it doesn't admire itself. The flowers that give a sweet fragrance are most loved. A cloud that does not bring rain is worthy of regret. Attachments are a ditch that is hard to jump over. 85. A herald was sent to the king to inform him about the defeat of his army. The herald knew that whoever brings such a message is to be beheaded, and while on the way, he thought of a ruse that could save his life. When the herald was brought into the throne hall, he fell to his knees, begging the king to pardon him because he had completely forgotten the message. The king and his ministers reflected. On the one hand, the herald was clearly worthy of death for such a breach of duty, but on the other hand, should his life be spared, there remained hope that he would remember the important message. So for the time being, they decided not to execute him. Soon, the tragic news reached the king through a different channel, and the herald was saved. 86. For a rope walker, the rope is the only way. A blind man cannot leave home without his walking stick. He whose leg is in a cast should not lose his crutches. In the spiritual life, without a pure heart, you cannot make a single step. 87. A young geologist set out on an expedition into the mountains. At first, he had trouble breathing and working. Besides, he suffered from insomnia. His colleagues tried to reassure him. You will get used to the high altitude and feel better. After some time, the geologist started to get accustomed to the mountain air. He was efficient in his work and even traveled on foot. When they told him to briefly return to the city to take care of some business, he was reluctant to leave the mountains that he had already gotten used to and had even come to love. In the city, they asked the geologist, "Well, young man, did you find anything in the mountains?" "Yes," he replied, "I found patience." 88. Once a minister was falsely accused of a very serious crime, a plot against the Tsar. The minister was not guilty, and at every interrogation denied his participation in the plot. The Tsar decided to test the minister. The following royal decree was read to the prisoner. If the accused persists in the denial of guilt, he shall be executed as an obstinate and unrepentant criminal. If the accused admits his participation in the plot, he shall be sentenced to life imprisonment. However, the guards and the executioner had been instructed to execute the prisoner if he admits his guilt. And if he continues to insist on his innocence, he was to be left alive and sent to exile. After the executioner finished reading the royal decree to the prisoner, he said gravely, "Say your last word. If you admit your guilt, say yes, and you shall save your life. And if you say no, you shall be executed as an obstinate and unrepentant evildoer." The minister firmly answered no. The execution was not carried out. 89. A sleeping man dreamed that he was looking in the mirror and not seeing his reflection in it. When he woke up, he remembered the dream, was terrified, and rushed to the mirror. But the reflection was there, as usual, so the man smiled with relief and said, "As long as we are two, I am alive." A servant who heard these words remarked, "Master, and without the mirror you are not sure to be alive, are you?" Здесь пропущена строка. Так что мы 90 пропустим. 91. City dwellers are like stars in the sky. It appears that they are close to each other, but in reality great distances lie between them. In a dense crowd, people are hugging each other, but it doesn't make them happy. Birds of a flock stay together, but in case of danger they are quick to disperse. Every encounter, except the encounter with truth, is the beginning of separation. Things that make one look back. A blooming lilac, a rainbow over the field, snow-covered summits at sunset, pure and beautiful eyes of a maiden, kind and wise countenance of an old man. 93. When a turtle dove is hatching its eggs, the entire world disappears for it. When a nightingale sings, it hears nothing except for its own song. When a cat sees a mouse, nothing else matters to it. When a tailor is threading a needle, he sees only the needle's eye. 94. He who is drowning needs a life belt, not the instructions on how to swim. He who is asking to lend him some money needs help, not a conversation about friendship. He who is freezing at night needs a blanket, not the address of a store where they are sold. He who is looking for spiritual support will not be consoled by books about kindness. 95. Two peasants worked in the field until noon. It was very hot, and one of them suggested the other to go down to the river for a swim. On the way, they were talking about how nice it was to have a river nearby. They reached the bank, took off their clothes, and dived into the river. When the two of them came to the surface, one of the peasants said, "By the way, we haven't finished the talk about our river." "But what is the use of it now?" his friend replied. "Instead of talking about the river, let us swim in it instead." "96. Duckweed does not withstand running water. Bats never fly in the sunlight. Pigs do not bathe in mountain streams. Evil thoughts do not live in a good heart. 97. A blind man came to a police precinct to get an ID. He was received by an officer who was a big heavy man with a high shrieking voice. Another blind man had an appointment with a doctor who possessed a hoarse and loud voice, although he was short and frail. Afterwards, the two blind men met and started to chat. "How is it possible that our police force hires such dwarfs?" the first blind man said. "I always thought that police officers were tall and strong." "And I had a doctor's appointment today," the other blind man said. "Such a huge fellow with a hoarse voice. I wonder how he can even be a doctor." 98. Butterflies dash towards fire, and they perish. Iron shavings move towards the magnet, and they get stuck to it. A fish swallows the bait, and it ends up in the pot. People endlessly multiply their desires, and they run out of time to fulfill them. 99. To shake dynamite in your hands, to taste hydrochloric acid, to let a snake bite you, is the same as to consent to an evil thought. 100. Wherever you go, you will be followed by the blessing of your father, the grateful memory of those whom you helped, the prayers of your starets. And wherever you go, you will always be pursued by the memory of your bad deeds, the hostility of those whom you offended, the hatred towards yourself and towards those who stand in your way. Section 2. 1. A young married couple is going to the sea for their vacation. I can imagine how we are riding in a train, the wife says, daydreaming. I can imagine how we are sunbathing on the beach, the husband replies playfully. So they say goodbye to the parents and leave for the railway station. On the way, their car suddenly breaks down. So they are late for the train and have to call the parents and tell them they are returning home. We can imagine the faces they have now, the parents sigh. 2. A scientist and a worker were trapped by a snowstorm in the Arctic. They were lost and exhausted. The worker saw a leeward slope and offered to dig a niche in the snow, so that they can take refuge there until the storm is over. They began to dig the glaciated snow with their hands. I have learned so much, the scientist groaned, and now all that knowledge is of no use to me at all. You better forget all you have learned for now and dig faster if you want to live, the worker said. 3. The Tsar and his retinue were passing through a village. The Tsar found the place pleasant to look at, and he desired to converse with the members of the community. A delegation was quickly formed. The little son of one of the delegates was begging his father to take him along to see the Tsar. The boy was crying, and his father finally agreed. When the Tsar appeared, the peasants bended their knees, and the Tsar began to address them. The little boy touched his father's shoulder from behind and whispered, "Dad, and what is this fabric that the Tsar's cloak is made of? And what is this hat he is wearing?" The father looked over cautiously and whispered back, "Sonny, just look. Don't say a word, otherwise you will no longer see not just the hat, but the Tsar himself." 4. Once a good maiden fell ill, and the doctors were at a loss how to cure her. Her two brothers promised their parents that they would save their sister. In the mountain part of their kingdom there lived a wizard. The brothers hurried to him and asked for advice. "In the distant mountains there is an orchard with magic apples that can cure any illness," the old man said. "But terrible monsters roam around the orchard. Those monsters are capable of reading one's mind. If a man is afraid of them, the monsters will tear him apart right away. Only he who is courageous will be able to enter the orchard and gather the magic fruit." "Yes, that is dangerous," the brothers agreed. "But we shall give our lives for the sake of our sister." "Then forward," the wizard exclaimed. "I shall give you yet another advice. If you follow it, you shall not perish. As soon as you see the monsters, start to inwardly repeat the magic word, arnophe. Do it incessantly. The brothers departed, and after a long journey, they finally saw the magic orchard. At that very moment, horrible monsters emerged from the thicket and rushed towards them. Arnophe, 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 the brothers repeated and went forward bravely. The monsters stood still, perplexed. The young men entered the orchard, gathered the magic apples, and walked back out past the immobile monsters, repeating the miraculous word. Soon they were by their sister's bedside. She tasted the magic fruit and became even more beautiful than before. 5. A scientist traveled to a country where people's speech resembled the murmur of a spring. Having returned home, he told his family about his journey and about the language of that country, similar to the sounds produced by running water. Once, the man and his little son were walking through a forest. They sat down to rest at a clearing, on the edge of which a small spring was running. The boy listened attentively and said, "Dad, do you hear? Here someone can also speak that language." 6. Two teenage brothers wanted to treat themselves and their friend to some strawberries. They did not ask their parents' permission and just sneaked into the garden. Their friend, savoring the free dessert, repeated all the time, "Great strawberries, fantastic, the best I have ever eaten." The brothers whispered to him, "You better eat the strawberries, not chatter about them. The parents may hear you." 7. A family lived on the first floor, above the shop of a bird salesman. Once their little boy was standing on the balcony and heard loud voices. Someone below was shouting, "Give me your money, give me your money, I'll shoot, I'll shoot, police, police." The boy was frightened and ran to his father's study. "Daddy, Daddy," the boy screamed. "Some people below want money, they are ready to shoot, and someone is calling the police." "No, sonny," the father laughed. "They have just brought a parrot to the shop." 8. An old watchman guarded a cherry orchard. At dawn, a bird of rare beauty used to fly into the orchard and peck cherries. The old man admired the bird's extraordinary appearance and did not chase it away. He told his grandchildren about the bird, and they begged their granddad to let them see it. Early in the morning, the watchman woke the children up and said, "Come out to the orchard quietly, it is there." The children ran out and rushed towards the gates of the orchard, bumping against each other and making noise. "I will be the first to look at it. No, me. No, me," the children were shouting. Having discovered nothing in the orchard, they asked, "Granddad, and where is the beautiful bird?" "Oh, you little rascals," he replied. "That bird does not like noise and shouting. That is why it flew away." 9. In the mountains, a young man discovered a cave with very beautiful but fragile stalactites. "This is a true wonder," he exclaimed, overjoyed. Suddenly, the stones forming the cave's walls started to reel, and some even went down. By some miracle, the vault did not collapse. The young man left the cave cautiously, but told a friend about his discovery. The friend also wanted to see the cave. "Just stay silent," the young man warned him. When the friend saw the stalactites, he could not suppress a shout. "Oh my!" At that very moment, stones started to fall down with thunder, a cloud of dust rose, and the two friends were lucky just to jump out of the cave, the beauty of which was disappearing in front of their eyes. 10. During a storm, you don't see a single boat at sea, and during the dead calm, you don't see a single wave. Man's heart may become the firmament, and may turn into a dump of evil thoughts. 11. A conjurer's aides are sawing his famulus in half. The audience applauds. At that moment, the conjurer's magic closet falls right on him. The audience applauds even louder. No, no, this is not my trick, the conjurer groans.